All right, welcome everybody. Thank you guys for coming out. I always tell people when they come to these conferences, the worst place you can be right now is at my talk. The hallway con, yeah, cheer it up. No, but seriously, hallway con, you're gonna meet some of the nicest people, you're gonna learn some cool stuff, and you can watch it online probably later, but I do appreciate you folks coming out here. Real quick, before we get started, a couple of things. If you want to take pictures of slides and stuff, I don't care, fine. There's a link there that has all of the slides. I see people taking really crappy pictures with their cameras for the slides, which is fine, or you can use a PDF. And then people are like, well, I'm not gonna download your stuff. I'm like, yeah. Like, I'm gonna give you malware with my name and company right next to it. Like, that's the worst freaking idea of all time. So I'm Tim Medin. I do pen testing and have done pen testing for a long time. Used to be a SANS instructor, been in security, IT, the same sort of thing. I hate these intro slides because people will talk for 5 minutes and that should take about 30 seconds. Cool. By the way, I like interactivity. If you've got questions, throw them out there. Let's talk, okay? How many of you folks, out of curiosity, how many of you are offensive people? And I don't mean, cursing out little kids. 3. How many of you are defensive? System admins? 1. Well, there's a few of you who didn't raise your hand at all. Are you audit? Managers? Are you in the wrong? Did you mean to go to the bar? Purple team. Okay. All right. Fair enough. Yeah. All right. So the dirty little secret for us as red teamers is we're not special. I'm sorry. Your mom told you you were, but it's not true. Okay. And by that, what I mean is, as red teamers, our sole freaking job is to make the defensive better and help keep the bad guys out. And I remember, who went to like a lot of the conferences like DEF CON like 15, 20 years ago? Anybody, any of those? Like so many of those events you'd go to and you'd see the people on stage doing some really cool, neat, badass hack. And then you're like, cool, what do we do about it? Like, that's not my problem. And you're like, well, that was great. Did you make the world a better place today? I'm not sure if you did, but no. But like our sole job is to make these organizations more secure, to help them understand and make better decisions. And ideally, with all the content you're getting at this, YouTube videos, whatever it might be, you can make yourself more secure without having to hire the expensive consultants. And I say that as an expensive consultant. Okay? So, like I said, red's not special. In fact, we're on the same side. Have you, as a red teamer, have you ever experienced a pen test where it was extremely adversarial, where they're like, we're not gonna tell you anything, we're gonna treat you like the proverbial redheaded stepchild, right? And you're like, what's the point? Right? And hopefully none of you blue teamers have done that. Like, we're on the same side here. Right? Our goal is to collectively find the badness and eradicate it from our organization. It's like, imagine going to like, anybody doing like martial arts or something? I don't know why I've got so many like hand-raising things today, but we're gonna do that. Yeah. Right, you do some sparring, right? Imagine going to sparring and be like, I don't want to, because, it could hurt in the real world. You're like, well, no, you're preparing for the other stuff, right? You're preparing for when, hopefully never happens, but the bad thing actually happens. We're staying ahead of that. Failures are not that. They're learning opportunities. And they should be learning opportunities in a safe space. The time to learn that you have some sort of issue in your network is not during a breach. That is not the right time to have an architectural discussion. You're not gonna break out change control in the middle of a breach and be like, let's get everybody together and schedule this for next Tuesday. Not the right time, right? Much better to have this. We had one of the gentlemen in the back, purple team, great opportunity for some of this learning where we can get this from some of the both sides. The age-old story, right? Passwords suck. It is a necessary evil. It exists. We can't get rid of it. I always love it when the systems are like, we're passwordless. And all it does is send in password a little code to your email that you access with a password. It's just, what passwordless means is somebody else's password. It just means a different password, right? We're just pushing the bucket, oversimplifying to some degree here. But the age-old story here, right? We see the credential stuffing. For us as attackers, less common as it once was, but it is still the gift that keeps on giving. How many of you have the family member who has a secure password they use everywhere? How do they know it's secure? Because it's got an exclamation point in it? Yeah, probably, right? Well, no one's told me it's bad, right? We see this kind of crap all the time. So when we see people create an account on something like LinkedIn. LinkedIn, if you're not familiar with it, is just really shitty Facebook. But like we had with, was it 2001, where there was a breach at LinkedIn. And now, of course, username is right there, which is the email address. Get the password, start using this all over the place. My favorite thing is I talk to people like, Tim, I got my Netflix hacked. Like, you technically, sort of, yes, but realistically, you just used the same crappy password as everywhere else, and somebody just used it and accessed your Netflix. And did it actually hurt you at all? A whole different discussion, right? But we see the common password type stuff, right? How often, according to auditors, and I'm wording this extremely carefully, are we supposed to change our passwords? No auditors in here, right? No one wants to admit it, at least. Fair enough. According to auditors, how often are we supposed to change our passwords? 90 days. You guys know why? When Moses came down from the mountain, the third, no, my guess it was two dudes who were bad at math, by the way, sitting in an office in the 90s like, hey, should we change passwords? Sounds good. How often should we do it? I don't know, 4 times a year. How many days is that? 90. Close enough, right? Not 91 and a quarter or whatever and change, right? 90 days. And this has been this sort of, it's like the appendix of security, this superstitious, what's the right word? This thing we don't need, right? That has been existing and we can't get rid of it. NIST has changed their guidance. Microsoft, Google are like, get rid of it. Stop making people change passwords because we have evidence that over time, people will pick a worse and worse and worse password, right? Or they'll get to have any of you ever worked the help desk on January 2nd? Sir. All day that day, what happened? You had calls about?
Need password reset.
I need my password reset. Have any of you called on January 2nd? No one wants to admit it? Okay, cool. All our auditors just admitted it too? No, right, we reset my password, right? So users are incredibly smart sometimes. They're like, how do I game this so I can do what I need to do and just continue working? So they look outside, right? And in January in Minnesota, I know I used to live in Mankato and Wisconsin and stuff. January sucks, right? I mean, it ain't no February, but it still sucks, right? Look outside and everything is covered in snow. At least it's kind of the pretty white stuff, unlike, June. And they look outside, they're like, hey, I could use the password of winter. And then they start thinking like, oh man, ideally next year we're gonna have a winter. Also, I need a number to differentiate this winter from next winter. And they sit there for probably 45 minutes to an hour, and they come up with 25, because that's the year, right? And then 90 days later we have? Spring. Well, you guys don't, but the rest of us do. 90 days later? Summer then? Fall, autumn. It's twice as hard that time of the year, by the way. By the way, I did a talk similar to this in Singapore, and they were like, what's a season? Because they're like literally like this far from the equator. They're like, it's always the same. It's incredibly hot. No idea. Anyway, so we see people use these kinds of schemes. Or the company name followed by a number. Or local sports teams. By the way, Vikings suck, Packers rule. Or collectively, we can at least admit Bears suck, right? Except you. All right, fair enough. Right, but you see these kinds of things, especially at certain times of the year. Spring, you'll see more baseball teams. In the fall, a lot more football teams, whether it's college or professional or weird things like that. About 2 years ago, I went back to school. I run a business, and I'm like, I need to take some business classes because I have no idea what I'm doing. And they're like, hey, does anybody want to present on what they do in like 15 minutes? By the way, does anybody remember presenting in high school and you had to give a 5-minute speech and it was the worst day of your life? And now you give a talk and you're like, 15, that's it? 15 minutes? Anyway, shrink it down, 15 minutes. Got to the slide. What I had done is I'd taken all the email addresses of all the people in my class at this prestigious university, as they call it, and grabbed all their passwords. And I had a slide where I'm like, hey, don't reuse passwords. And I like to think I'm entertaining, but they're like, yeah, we hear this crap at work. Click to the next slide and don't reuse passwords. And all it is their passwords on the screen. It was one of the most beautiful moments of my life, all right? You know, child, that moment, the other couple children, right? Like, beautiful moment, like the collective gasp. One lady was like, oh my God, that's my, and then realized she had just, I already knew, but whatever. Right, but it's that same old story of I use my same secure password all over the place. I did the same thing for a company in Portugal. And they had cities in Portugal. They had their office names in Portugal. They had the name of the company followed by literally just a 1. All of these passwords, and they, by the way, they worked. And it was a Zoom call. I was bummed I couldn't fly to Portugal. But like, I'm talking, and then all the cameras go off, except like one guy, and he's dying uncontrollably laughing. He's a security guy, and I'm like, another great moment, right? But this kind of stuff, unfortunately, just keeps working, right? Now, what can you do on your side to prevent this? Ideally, if you're using something like, you know, Azure, things like that, you can ban some of these words. Kill summer, winter, fall, the Vikings, right? Kill all these things. Don't let them people use these words at all. Or some sort of shim in Active Directory to prevent it up front. Be proactive. Alternatively, crack them yourself. Get rid of, you know, company name followed by a number. Do any of you, have you ever worked at an organization where HR gives you a password on day 1 and it's like welcome 1? Right? And it's your first day of the job, you're super nervous, you're like, am I gonna like this job? Are they gonna like me? Right, like, is the food gonna be good? Like, is this job gonna suck? Like, I'm gonna get, right? And you're like, cool, pick a password right now. And you're like, welcome to. There was one organization we were at, and we could tell how long some people had been at the company by their welcome number. Because every 90 days, they would change that. And there was like one dude who was like 27, and I was like, holy smokes, this guy's been here a little bit. Just changing the number at the end, right? So look for these things. Pull them down. Great blog post here from, I can't pronounce that, where we can audit some of those things. And then crack, this is a very simple overview on how to use Hashcat. Look at those. Grab those password hashes, crack them, look for those bad passwords, get rid of this low-hanging fruit. My favorite thing, every year when you go to RSA, there's this new thing that's gonna save the world. Like when I first went to Black Hat, like NAC was gonna save the world. Like we were no longer gonna have like whales dying, children were gonna be fed, if we only all just used NAC. And of course now we AI everything. And we're like, you know, why don't we just get rid of some of the basic crap, get rid of that before we spend tens of millions of dollars on this vendor stuff that's wavy hands magic that's missing some of the basics. It always goes back to some of the basics. Another one, my personal favorite because it's my baby, similar to that, once we gain our initial access, we can grab a ticket for any service account in the organization. Your domain controller does not decide if you have access to a system. She's like, hey, can I get a ticket for that? It'll happily send you the ticket. You take the ticket presented to the server then decides. But that ticket material, it's encrypted using the password hash of the target service, which means as an attacker, I can offline crack a service account password. If I'm doing an offline crack, do I have to worry about lockouts? Has anybody in the history of mankind changed a service account password? One sort of. He's like, yeah, well, not really. We changed welcome 1 to welcome 2, right? Right, but service account passwords are extremely long-lived. Extremely long-lived, because everyone is terrified of changing the password for a database server. Because if you crash the database server, it's time to update your resume. Like the database server, you walk into the data center, and once a year, you bring in a bowl of fruit. It's a sign of submission and your humbleness to it, and then you back out. You don't turn your back on it, or it's going to crash, right? You show your respects, but those service accounts, because I can crack them, I can literally crack them for years, and it's going to be still valid. Offline cracking, and I can do it as fast as my little GPUs will let me do it, right? Simple ways to do this. Tons of different ways to do this. One is great script is invoke Kerberos. We pull the tickets back. Once again, hashcat. Here we're going to use the mode 13100. You probably want to get a little bit more advanced with some of the password guessing rules. I'm not going to go super deep into that. Knock some of those things out, because this stuff still works. We're still seeing this in some of our pen tests and red teams. Are we seeing as much as we initially did? No, but it's still out there. We still need to get some of these things knocked down, right? Now, some of you were talking about passwords. You're like, yeah, but we have MFA. MFA is cool, but there's also limits to it. We have to understand what are some of the limitations associated with that, right? One of my favorite stories was Uber. The bad guys were sending MFA requests at like 3 in the morning on a Saturday night when the people working at Uber were hammered, and they were like, decline, 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 and eventually they're like, oh my God, make this go away, fine, take it. And letting some of the bad guys in. Right? We need to understand some of the limitations about this. The ideal implementation for this is I have to take some sort of code and enter it into the other thing. So even if I wanted to give the attacker the information, I couldn't. A simple approve is way too simple to get wrong. Is it a little bit extra? Sure. But ideally, we can set things up like conditional access policies where we only need it with more privileged style actions associated with that. But we can also see where we're not using these. Any of you work at organizations where it's primarily Windows? No one wants to admit it, right? Okay. Right, I have. And at those organizations, we had Linux systems, but we don't talk about those systems. We didn't have a way to integrate those into Active Directory, which means it's not tied into our central authentication. It's not tied into our MFA. So we can attack some of those things. Or there's some more antiquated systems where we simply can't use it, or it's customer-facing and we can't get customers to enable the MFA. MFA Sweep, great tool from Bo Bullock from Black Hills, where we can look for some of those opportunities, right? Now, as an attacker, why do I want MFA? Well, why do I want not MFA? Well, whatever it is. Because I don't have to get the MFA. I don't have to go through the extra step now of guessing the username, the password, and then social engineering the MFA, or tricking the user to MFA. I can just get username, password, and now I'm in. And it always kills me. Some of the most important accounts at organizations have all the security features turned off. And you can tell who those people are because their title starts with a C. And they're also the people that aren't part of phishing engagements or social engineering engagements or anything else. Meanwhile, they direct and steer the entire company, but that's a whole separate thing. Everyone's scared of messing with those folks. We had one organization, it was COO, something like that. Big dog, or something like this worked. There's another test I had a number of years ago where it was the director of HR. Now, in an organization, there are two groups of people that the employees are scared of. The first is IT. We're basically IT, we work with them. Sometimes we beat them up because we're on the red team. We're not scared of them. We're all terrified of HR. HR puts a meeting on your calendar and you are sweating, having anxiety attacks, right? You need to find some of those Minnesota edibles that are now legal, which is crazy, right? Also, does anybody understand their health insurance? I mean, no, I'm asking because I need help. It's that time of year for us. But like, you get so many attachments from HR. Right? Imagine the impact an attacker would have as a director of HR. You've got access to everything. I mean, you're not an IT guy, IT person rather, but you're like this close to that. You've also got personnel records, pay records, maybe you can update payment information, all sorts of fun and interesting things there as well. He's got my fantastic Bloodhound shirt. I like the new simplified Bloodhound shirt, by the way. If you aren't, as a defensive person, running something like Bloodhound, you should. There's another tool, I should update this and also mention Ping Castle. But what Ping Castle, Bloodhound, there's a couple other in there, Locksmith. Tried to drop the name of his tool and screwed it up. Way to go, Tim. What's that?
It's Jake's.
Jake's? Oh, all right, then screw Jake. All right, fine. But what this allows us to do is look at some of the Active Directory misconfigurations. Because what you're going to get with your vulnerability scan is 3 million pages, and 2,999,999 of those pages are going to be related to TLS 1.0 being enabled. And realistically, it doesn't mean a damn thing for your organization, but it shows up on something that bosses love. Bosses, more than anything else in the world, and you can check with the vendors, they love a single pane of glass, a dashboard, right? And if you look at your vulnerability dashboard, it's like, oh my God, how are we not just breached? And you're like, well, most of these don't even actually freaking matter for squat. And they're not looking at misconfigurations in permissions. And these Active Directory environments, it's not that Active Directory itself is insecure, it's we designed the architecture before a couple of you were probably even born at some organizations, I'm not even joking, right? And we just added onto it and added onto it and added onto it, and no one looked at the permissions. I've seen a number of times where, like the help desk, right? Who was my help desk person? Was it you? Right? Like your job as a help desk is to change people's passwords, right? So in Active Directory, you're like, you can reset passwords for any of the users in our environments, including domain admin, which means by proxy, he's a domain admin, right? And that is not an architectural issue you want to figure out during a breach. That is an architectural issue that's going to take a lot of meetings. It's going to suck, right? You're going to have to figure some of these things out. Like, what does this look like? Do we have 2 tiers of help desk, or do they have an admin that's there, right? Have some of these discussions to get ahead of these things. Or someone, and I've done this myself, when you're fixing something, you keep clicking until it works, right? And you're like, well, let's just add a couple of more permissions, and it works. And you're like, should I take them away and confirm which one's the right one? No, we'll just leave it. And we've seen things with like generic read over everything, generic write all over all sorts of weird things, or all kinds of other weird permissions that when somebody was setting a system up, clicking that button made it work, and they were done with their job. Bloodhound, Ping Castle. Bloodhound's much better for finding attack paths. You do need a little bit of, I don't want to say red knowledge, a little bit more red-er knowledge to kind of read through some of that. Ping Castle is great because guess what it's got? Dashboards. right? And there's Bloodhound, of course. There's the Bloodhound. Well, there's the Bloodhound.
Enterprise has that.
Enterprise does have that too, yeah. I don't want to throw them, yeah. So they got dashboards there as well, but it helps you, give you guidance. You're like, hey, here are some of the insecurities, the design issues that are not as simple as download, patch, and install it. These are architectural issues you're going to have conversations about and solve. And the last thing you want to do is solve architectural issues during a breach. That is not fun. You don't make good decisions at a time like that, right? To do this, I love me some Bloodhound. Absolutely adore this. But if you want to use Bloodhound, what we need to use is what's called an ingester. Now, this is an extremely, extremely loud tool. It basically says, hey, Active Directory, I'm going to send you a query for everything. It will also talk to a lot of your other systems, too. It could, prior to a Microsoft patch, actually figure out who was logged into systems, which was wild. Any user could figure out who was any other user that was logged into another system, which the fact that it was a feature, I mean, I kind of expected it. But what you could do then is figure out build these attack paths where jump on a system where a user is logged in, impersonate that user, all sorts of other fun, interesting stuff. So you take these ingesters, feed it into Bloodhound, Ping Castle, a number of other tools, and start analyzing some of those maps. And then start figuring out some of those architectural issues. And these are things that you can do as a blue teamer. You don't need the expensive red teamers like me, right? But yeah, those can be definitely tough. And there's a ton of different issues. You'll see GPO issues, a lot of permissions issues, over-provisioning, a lot of weird permission stuff in that. I remember when I first saw Bloodhound, I leaned over to Josh Wright, and I was like, Josh, are we out of work now? Have we literally been replaced with a shell script? Because it does a lot of the things that us as red teamers do. We get access to a single account. Like, okay, what other accounts can I access? Where are the permissions set up incorrectly? And I'm oftentimes trying to fight to get domain admin or go after a specific system. I was like, have we been literally replaced with a shell script? Ideally, you run this yourself as the defender, blue teamer, system admin, whatever. Figure this out before you waste time and energy with the red teamer folks. That said, we do kind of like a couple of wins once in a while to feel like we're valuable people, but that's a whole different discussion. File shares. Sharing is caring, right? File shares are the garbage dump of most organizations. Where should we put it? On the F drive, right? And stuff just goes there. And this, much like Active Directory, we build these shares, and it was built with like Windows NT way back in the day. And it was upgraded slowly over time, and the permissions kind of stayed the same and not really. But what we see far too often, and I would almost venture to say 100% of the time, find something valuable as an offensive person on those file shares. Sometimes it's like all the PII is on there with the incorrect permissions. I've seen plenty of times where there's a backup of the domain controller on a file share in an insecure location, which means I too am domain admin. Other times you'll get maybe one password, a single password or a couple of passwords, typically for service accounts. Other times it might be smaller, little bits and pieces of intellectual property. I was doing a test a while ago for a financial institution. This financial institution, to knock on their door, you had to want to invest $20 million with them. That's a lot of millions. That's a lot of pesos, right? That's how much you want to invest with them. Forget about the other stuff that you have and maybe invest someplace else, right? So you had to have 20 million bucks. And by the way, those are the broke people. They're like, oh, you only have one jet? Oh, your yacht doesn't have a helicopter pad? Oh, how do you live? Jerks, right? No, but so doing a test, and they had stuff locked down. I couldn't escalate. I couldn't do lateral movement. They had a screen that was off to my left that showed the password guessing attempts. And every time I saw a bad password, I would cringe. I'm like, God, it's going to be up on the wall. And it was staring at me, telling me that, like, hey, maybe you should become a sales engineer or a realtor, right? So went for a walk, which, by the way, sometimes the best way to solve a problem is to just stop. I'm not saying give up, but stop trying to solve the problem. Go do something else. I'm like, I need a break. Went to a coffee shop, get to the coffee shop, and it finally hit me. I'm like, look at the shares. I was looking at their big shares. What I did is set up a broader net, looking at all the file shares. This organization was really locked down because they're protecting huge sums of money, right? I found file shares, what the users were doing to share bank accounts, routing numbers, social security numbers for all these high net worth individuals is they would on their computer create a share, put the files there. Now, what do you think the chances of them setting up the permissions on the share properly? Much like we talked about, they keep clicking until it works, which means everybody has access. Also, do you know what the Latin word for temporary is? Forever. Well, he actually knows the Latin word? Oh, God. I'm not that smart, right? Temporary does not exist. So these shares were all over the place. There was bank accounts and routing numbers. I saw account, like the value of those accounts. I thought it was a social security number. It had so many digits. I thought it was a routing number. And I was like, wait a second, that's actually you have that much money? How many of those accounts would any of us need to retire comfortably? Part of one account is the right answer, right? In developing countries, an entire village could retire. And I don't say that too sarcastically, like huge sums of money. Now you're probably thinking, it's like, well, it's just one piece of data. But think about that organization. Imagine they end up in the news because one of those accounts was drained. Now, I can guarantee you that company would quickly give them their money back. But now you're in the news for losing this much money. Now these high net worth people read about it on the front page of the Wall Street Journal. They close their accounts. In fact, they don't even close their accounts. They have their people, right? They call up their personal assistant and be like, move everything out of there, and that company is gone overnight. Right? Some major impact over something simple like that. Great stuff for things like this. There's Snaffler. Snaffler is a great tool to do some of this. PowerView with the single longest named command of all time. Find interesting domain, file, share, file. And it's going to look for specific file types that are interesting, VMDK, or look for names with things like secret or password, or look in the contents of certain files for password or secret and things like that. But ideally, you want to get that off your network beforehand, right? Again, this is another situation where giant file share, or maybe a whole bunch of file shares, we want to get this stuff locked down. Changing the permissions on a file share is one of the most terrifying things you will ever do. Adding is fine, but when you go to the file share and you right-click and remove a permission, it's terrifying. Ask me how I know. I changed the permissions and then went to a Minnesota Twins game like 15 years ago, and I got a phone call because I broke the entire call center. Whatever. Everyone hates the phone anyway, right? Because I was cleaning stuff up, caused a cascading set of issues. I kept my job, though. It's okay. I still cry about it. But yeah, look at these things ahead of time, right? And look at it again before, and you can do this before you need the offensive people, and you can do a lot of this, again, yourself as a defensive person. Here's Snaffler. Same sort of thing. They're both very, very noisy. And in any decent-sized organizations, you're going to set these suckers up to run, and it's going to take a long time. Put them on a fast link, wired, not wireless. Let them do their thing, perform some of that analysis. And there's some like industry tools you can pay a lot of money for that do the same kind of thing that are really just wrappers for some of these pieces. But here's some cheap and easy, well, cheap, free ways to do some of this yourself here. Oh, here was the story. I got ahead of myself. Here's the story I meant to tell about that giant company. Guy on my team had a very similar experience, wrote a blog post on it, Mike Saunders. Very similar, where he couldn't escalate, couldn't do lateral movement. And the important thing to remember here is, while the bad guys, especially in the days of ransomware, would love domain admin, they don't need domain admin. Because if it's all just sitting on a file share, who cares? Right? Imagine, you know, China and North Korea, they're trying to steal intellectual property. Well, they don't need domain admin. They need access to maybe an engineer's computer who has access to the file share that has all the drawings, and they just copy all those back. Fewer hops. We don't have to get to domain admins. There's a lot of paths to have a significant impact at organizations, right? A couple of things you can do to help yourself out, right? Remove the plain text credentials, get the proper access controls. Honeypots and some of the deception is a great tool. We talked about Kerber roasting earlier. Set up a fake service account so that when someone requests a ticket for it, no one is going to accidentally request a ticket for a service. You're not going to have a user who accidentally requests a ticket for a service that they have no business reason to use. Now the file shares, users might get a little click happy and click around and want to look at stuff, so you could have a little bit of extra trigger there. But great thing to do is plant some of those around so that, hey, maybe we didn't detect the bad guy getting in, but now we can detect them afterwards, and we can shorten their dwell time and start to catch up to them quicker than waiting till all of our screens turn blue and we've got ransomware throughout the organization, right? I remember when I first saw it, this drives me nuts, by the way. So Active Directory Certificate Services, big giant name. They shortened it, but left the space in the middle. Who does that? Like when you take an acronym, you just smash, jerks, whatever. I remember when I first saw some of this stuff. So Active Directory Certificate Services, we use this for PKI, we use it for email signatures, encryption, the TLS certificates inside, all sorts of authentication certificates as well. I remember when the folks at Spectre Ops came up with this, and I was like, this stuff's not going to happen in the real world. Are you kidding me? And a couple of months later, we started seeing it in the wild. We're like, oh yeah, it is. And that's because, going back to what I talked about before, and we've all probably done it, and we just don't even know it, someone was trying to set up the certificate authority, and it wasn't working, so they kept adding permissions or changing things until it worked, and once it worked, don't change it anymore. So we saw all sorts of permissions issues associated with that, and we still see some. And it can be very simple to go from like a regular user to domain admin. And the cool thing about this, and say cool as a red teamer, not as a defender, but if I get the certificate for a user, like a big, powerful administrator, you can change that user's password all day long. You can change their MFA all day long. If that certificate's valid, I still maintain my access. This is another situation where you do not want to be making these changes during a breach. Now, the reason that we use a lot of this, and there's nothing wrong with ADCS, it's the implementation process, right? We all get the new job. What we don't want to do is have some poor IT person who has to be the certificate monkey that every time a new person starts, we have to issue them a certificate, right? And they just like, here's one for you, and here's one for you. So we automate this. We allow the users to request their own certificate, to use the certificate for authentication without any additional approval. The problem becomes when we add some of the other things in, like my favorite one is I can specify the subject alternate name, the SAM. So when I request a certificate, I can say, yeah, I'm Tim, but you couldn't call me Batman, right? You can call me domain admin. And now when I authenticate, I'm like, yeah, Tim can't, oh, domain admin? Yep, come on right in. And now I can access, and again, revocation, people have to do a lot more to remove that. You actually have to revoke the certificate to get rid of that. And there's plenty of others out there, like the SpectreOp teams, those guys are wicked smart. There's a bunch of privilege escalation, there's persistence, there's theft, and they keep adding more and more and more of these over the years. There's all sorts of crazy stuff in here. The big ones that we see personally have the biggest impact are ESC stands for escalation, privilege escalation. 1 and 3, 4? I feel like I typed that. It should be 1 and 3, I think. 1 is I am Batman. 3, I can change the template and just do whatever I want with it so that I can make it so that I can say that I'm Batman. 8 is a relaying. There's plenty of other stuff out there that happens as well. Those are the easiest buttons to hit when it comes to that. Again, you can find this with some of these tools here. The original was by the SpectreOps folks was Certify. There's also Certi and Certipy. Definitely not confusing. As you can guess, the Certipy, written in Python, they all do the same sort of thing. And in fact, I think, if I remember correctly, this is now integrated into Nessus, where we can pull some of this in, right? Somebody confirm that? I don't know. Maybe not, who knows? But we can start to look at some of these things. Again, architectural issues, lots of discussions. We had this happen a couple of, maybe 6 months ago, where the client had the I am Batman issue, and they're like, yeah, but we need that. What can we do? And I'm like, I don't know, sell your shares? We're like, well, you have to have someone, you'd have to get rid of that, or you have to have someone approve every single certificate. And they're like, we don't want to do that either. You're like, I don't know what to tell you. Like, whatever the heck, and it was apparently, according to what they told us, this was their vendor recommended setup. So in the setup guide for whatever vendor tool they were using, this incredibly insecure setting was what they told people to do, so that's what they did. They followed the directions, and they're like, well, we really have to use this software. And you're like, good luck, folks, right? Did I get it wrong here too?
Yeah, it's locksmith.
Whatever. Can you call Jake and have him rename it real quick? Where is Jake? Is he a trusted sec?
No, he's in St. Paris.
He's what?
St. Paris.
St. Paris, okay. Well, that whole bottom line, he's not a Trimark anymore either, so okay, whatever. Yeah, so what we've seen over time here, and if anybody remember like the Verizon breach report from, and I'm going back in time for a very specific reason, maybe 7 or 8 years ago, how long were the bad guys in our environments before they were being detected? Jeff?
9 or 10 months.
9 or 10 months. Yeah, one of the more recent ones I saw was like 5 or 6 months. Going back to your password rotations, how many rotations is that? Yeah, 2 over the 9 or 10, 3, right? At no point during a pen test, at no point during a breach has Vladimir in Moscow been like, son of a bitch, comrade, Stacy changed password. That was my terrible Russian accent, but we can do that these days. Right, at no point has an attacker been stopped mid-breach because Steve or Stacy had to change their password every 90 days. And what we see here, and the reason why I point the 6 months number out, this number has gotten smaller because of ransomware. It's because Vladimir doesn't want to wait that long and wants to party this weekend, right? And they let us know, we're seeing sometimes those between initial access and the ransomware event, like 24, 48 hours in some extreme cases. So still good metric means we're not great at detecting these things, right? We're detecting it when the ransomware happens, but it means we need to get ahead of these things. Shut it down, build better detections so that we can get ahead of a lot of these events here. So the protection is ideal, but that's only half of the story. Plenty of clients I've had over the years are like, yeah, our goal is to build the hard outer shell. And I'm like, we call that the eggshell defense. It's really cool until that shell cracks, and then you've got gooey mess all over the place. Right? You crack that shell, and it's game over. It's like, yeah, well, we really focus on keeping bad guys out. Well, no kidding. Well, I wish somebody had come up with that concept. Right? The other half of this story is, can we detect them once they're in? Because they will get in. Even the big dogs have some breaches. The question is, can you detect and respond quickly enough? I don't want to, well, we're in Minnesota, I can still bring up Target. It's a number of years ago, but like the Target breach. They had, so I used to live in Mankato, a little south of here, for most of you know, and I used to go to DC 612 up in the cities, and I used to do a bunch of speaking there, and in all my examples, I used Target.com, because until like a dude from Target came over, he's like, would you stop? I'm like, why? And I'm like, oh, I was just saying because it's a Target, not the Target. So then I just changed them all to Best Buy. So we got to understand, what do the bad guys want? Right? Ransomware these days, they want access. What do we have that's important? What is the PII, the IP, the whatever the sensitive, important information, and then build our defenses around those things. Build our castles around that. Build our defenses and the detections around that kind of stuff as well. And the goal here is for you folks to do that yourselves and not have to bring in somebody else. A lot of this stuff, pretty basic stuff. But I see this in far too many tests where I'm like, you could have just run some of these tools yourselves, squashed some of these bugs, and made everything a lot more secure before you start engaging pen testers to find the more esoteric or hard stuff and make people like the two of us cry because it's hard now. It used to be easy, right? So look at those common attack scenarios. One of the other things I really, really love is looking at the MITRE attacks, specifically the groups. So you're not going to see publicly posted pen test reports. Like I can't post mine, he can't post his, so you can't figure out the tools and techniques that we're using. However, the breach notifications contain a lot of this information, and MITRE has done a great job of documenting so that we, as well as all of you, can see, hey, what are the attackers doing these days? And you'll see some very consistent steps where like APT1 will take A, then go over here, then come down, and then APT2 will go this one, they'll do something slightly different, but then the rest is still the same. And we can look at those, understand those. Things like Atomic Red Team are a fantastic tool to run some of these techniques yourself in a quite exhaustive form. Figure out what your preventions as well as what's missing as far as detections. The thing that's really important to remember, we don't want to go for perfect. Perfect is too hard. If we can get all of our detections and preventions to 90%, we can get a lot more of them implemented. And we're more likely to have somebody bang into them on the way. Think of like layering Swiss cheese. If I've got one layer of Swiss cheese, big giant hole. I put another layer on top, probably a couple holes are covered, and some got a lot smaller. And we start adding more and more layers of Swiss cheese in here, eventually it becomes not porous, or you have to be very careful on how you make it through all of that to get to the sensitive thing. Oh yeah, by the way, the owls are hackable. So go play with those. All right, so that's gonna wrap up the talk. By the way, we've got a whole class, offense for defense, do consulting, obligatory stuff there. Questions from you folks?
is to start with logs of what's happening, sort of what's being locked to inform what I need to defend against for the likely next step.
So the question was, do I find it helpful to look at the logs? Repeat the second part, I forgot.
To sort of inform what people are trying to do to get in, so you can look at the MITRE stuff and see what, from that, if that succeeded, what's the next step? What should I look for?
Yeah, so the question is, so if I look at the logs, can I use that, compare it to some of the MITRE attack and figure out what some of the likely next steps? An important piece there is understand your network. Like, what does the normal user activity look like? And what does it look like? Can I detect when something is not the normal? Right? If all of a sudden I'm logging in from Minnesota, and then I go to Rochester, and then I go to Madison, and then instantaneously one comes in from Moscow, like, well, that's a little different. I can't travel there that fast. Right? So yeah, understand some of those baseline pieces. That's a little bit more, I don't want to say advanced, but it's great. It's important to understand those bases. It feeds the whole process with our purple teaming kind of thing there as well. Cool. Other questions? One more before we go. Or none, whatever. Cool. Well, thank you so much for coming out. Thank you so much for having me. Enjoy the rest of the time. Enjoy Hallway Con. And